Anyhow, I got more and more sick, and I ended up, luckily, I still had private healthcare from my uh, ex-directorship. So I ended up being sent to the Priory Hotel, it's a bit like a hotel, hospital in 1992. And they put me on very strong antidepressants. I wasn't actually depressed, but there was no real treatment for ME at that time. Nobody understood it. And in fact, I was introduced to a physiotherapist who called it learned helplessness, which was a term used by a very unhelpful psychiatrist at the time. It's like you've learned to be ill, so therefore you need to do more physical exercise. So she was pushing me to do more physically. And of course, this just made me more and more exhausted. I mean, I cannot explain how terrible the culture was in those days for people with ME, no internet, so very little connection with other people. What then happened was I lived in a village at that time called Wadhurst in East Sussex. And I met a wonderful yoga teacher one day when I was well enough to go into the village, which wasn't very frequently. And she said, I've come across a lot of people like you who seem to have this mysterious illness. And I want to set up a remedial yoga class. There's about 5 of you. So Angela, her name is Angela Stevens, she did that. I went to her yoga class. And it was something miraculous because it kind of made me connect with myself. And it was like a light bulb went off in my head. Now, at the time, I was very out of my body. I didn't know where my hips were or what my knee meant. And that in itself was a revelation to come back into the body. But also, Angela was beginning to talk about something called Atman, which is your true self, that quiet, still place inside yourself that you need to begin to remember and recognize. And that this true Atman part of yourself is actually the same as everything in the wider universe. Now, I'm not putting that very well, but I'm just beginning to introduce some of the ideas of yogic philosophy. The other thing she explained is that in the Yoga Sutras, yoga, the state of yoga, is said to come about when the fluctuations of the mind become quiet. Now, my mind had always driven me completely crazy. It was always full of very anxious, hyperactive thoughts that were attacking me. My sleep was bad as well. So it was a revelation that here was a potential tool that could help my mind to be quieter and to be kinder as well. So that's really when I started my yogic journey. And then I started going to a place which is unfortunately closed down now, called the Yoga for Health Foundation. And I started to meet other people with my condition. Now, added into all of this was my marriage, which was quite dysfunctional. I was married at the time to somebody who was quite narcissistic, which unfortunately has been a pattern of mine. Patterns in yoga are called samskaras. And when we want to heal, we need to see what our more destructive patterns are. So this was my pattern, and it's still something I have to be careful of. And his particular, I mean, narcissists tend to have an addiction. So that might be drugs or alcohol, it might be sex, relationships. His particular drug of choice was alcohol. And when he drank, he could be quite physically abusive at times. And I can say that now, he's been dead nearly 20 years, no, more than 20 years actually. So I can, be quite open about how it was. So my marriage in itself was very stressful. And now with what I know about the central nervous system, I can see there was no possibility of me recovering while I was still in an abusive marriage. I was still pushing to try to get well and prove myself to the world. And I didn't really know about pacing and rest. But yoga was beginning to show me some tools such as functional breathing, pranayama, resting, meditation. And then in 1999, I had a book published by Element, which is now owned by Thorson's, Beat Fatigue with Yoga. And that really spoke to other people like me who had ME, chronic fatigue syndrome. And then I started to train as a teacher. So I was just beginning to recover slightly with the help of yoga. And then I decided to come off the antidepressants, which I had been prescribed when I was in hospital. And as I came off the antidepressants, which was not easy in itself, I realized I had to leave my marriage, that it was very toxic and abusive. So that was another story. But in 2004, I left my marriage and I started to make a really good recovery. So that's kind of the first part of my story. So then I taught yoga in London for a few years, and I started to go to India a lot to study more about yoga. So I lived in ashrams, and I also studied under the tradition of Krishnamacharya and Desikachar. So I did more further training in yoga teaching. And I began to run retreats for people with ME who were coming to me because they had read the book, Beat Fatigue with Yoga. And then this is all going quite well. But what was interesting when I reflect back on that time was I was beginning to put my samskara of ambition back into my yoga teaching. And I think a lot of us do that because we're quite driven or ambitious because we don't feel good enough and we're not being compassionate to ourselves. And again, you know, even in 2010, I didn't know anything about self-compassion. And I didn't know that to not be ambitious was maybe not helpful. But what then happened was I was in Turkey teaching and I got a tick bite. And the tick was actually in my stomach. I tried to break it off and the head went deeper into me and it got stuck there for about 3 weeks. And then after about 6 weeks, I got chronic fatigue again. I got all my ME symptoms back and it was horrendous to be ill again. What I think again on reflection is I hadn't learned all my lessons. I hadn't done my, it's a word in yoga, swadhyaya. And that means self-reflection. It's really important that we look at ourselves and our patterns and what we're creating, what life we're creating. Because really, our life is what we create. And we can be angry about it, we can resist it, but unless we come into acceptance and we can see what's going on, then we're going to keep creating the same scenarios again and again. Just before this happened, I just want to say that I was studying Vedanta, which is the philosophy of knowledge. It's a kind of branch of yoga. I studied that for 2 years. And while I was studying, I visited Winchester Cathedral with my Vedanta teacher. And I had a vision while I was there. And it was as if everything stopped, Fiona disappeared, everything was love. And I saw Mother Mary holding baby Jesus. Now, I still don't identify as somebody who's religious. I identify as somebody who's deeply spiritual. But I don't like to be boxed in by any particular religion because I think all religions lead to the same point, which is that there is something more, there is a higher consciousness than us going on, that only our 5 senses can perceive. And I think life is about making that realization and realizing that we are that. So that's something which motivates me greatly in my life. So I developed Lyme disease. I was ill for about another 10 years. And I'm not going to talk too much about that time other than to say I went to live in Spain. I got involved with another man. I was about to end the relationship when he announced he had cancer. And because I'm a rescuer and a people pleaser, I felt I should stay with him. And it was a very difficult time. And I got even more sick because yet again, I was putting somebody else's needs before my own. And, you know, this very important lesson, if we're not well, is that we have to, the cliche, wear our own oxygen mask before we can help somebody on with theirs. So the situation was that I gave up teaching. I was with quite an angry man who was quite sick. I was sick myself, and I became quite distressed, quite ill, quite depressed. But again, I see this as a very, very important spiritual lesson, because whenever we have suffering or struggling, I think there's always a lesson there. And I've already explained that we have samskaras, we have patterns which we keep repeating. So for me, this was the pattern I was seeing of not being boundaried, people pleasing, always putting others' needs before myself, and not being embodied enough to feel what my needs were. Long story short, he died in 2019, then we went into COVID. And then after COVID, I've moved out to Spain because my health is much better here. And I have made now a full recovery. After having a brush with COVID, I got COVID August 2024, and it took me a good 4 months to recover. And there's a couple of people I would like to mention as having been of great help to me. So one was Helen Lyme, who runs the long COVID clinic. She really helped me to recover from that particular bout of chronic fatigue. Dr. Joe Dispenza, I love his work. I love how he's all about manifesting health by really focusing on health rather than symptoms and illness, which is something I really follow. And then there are other people who've really supported me in my journey, such as my friend and teacher, Sarah Ryan. So in conclusion, what I would say, there isn't a magic bullet to getting well. We have to change our lives. We have to eat well. Maybe that means cutting out alcohol completely, cutting out sugar, and think about what diet suits us. We have to balance rest with activity, and that activity has to be measured, so it's not creating PEM or post-exertion malaise. So pacing is really important. And we have to surround ourselves with nourishing community and not just focus on our symptoms and our health. And I know that's not always easy when we are ill, because it's about not denying either. It's always this kind of razor's edge of where we are with our symptoms. So I hope this is helpful. Just a reminder that I run 2 classes a week payable by donation, because I know many people with fatigue conditions don't have much money. I also run regular retreats, which are on my website. If you look up my name, you'll find my website. I've got 3 retreats in 2026. And if you're watching this after that, there will be more that are ongoing. And I've also got 2 books, which are kind of full of my passion and knowledge. So one is Yoga Therapy for Stress, Burnout and Chronic Fatigue Syndrome. That was written more for yoga teachers, but if you love yoga, then you will also find that of interest. And then the latest book is Breathe, Rest, Recover, which I wrote with my friend Nadine McKee. Nadine is a psychotherapist, and she too has recovered from long COVID. So I hope this inspires you, that you can recover. I promise you, you can recover. And good luck with everything. And I hope you have, well, I just hope this has been helpful for you. So take care, and I wish you lots of love.